And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Benched with Bubba, episode 655. We're talking Underdog Fantasy, season-long best ball. There are in-season tournaments and everything that probably won't talk about a ton on this show, but we'll get you ready for the 2024 season and much, much more. And in order to help me do this are two very, very intelligent Underdog Fantasy people. They stream a lot. They do a bunch of cool graphs. They work together. It's quite a smorgasbord of knowledge that's about to come to your guys' earbuds or eyes if you're on YouTube. So let's get to them. First off, in the top right corner for me, left corner maybe for you on the screen, you can find them on Twitter at DarkSheep3. That's D4RKSH33P _ Matt, how we doing, man?
Excellent. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me and your compadre who does a lot of the shows with you and whatnot over on the Stacking Dingers podcast. You can find him over on Twitter at baseball B3isbol. Chris, how we doing, man?
I'm great, Bubba. That was a 10 out of 10 pronunciation because usually from Matt and from Brendan, I usually get B3isbol to start our shows. So
I do it because Brendan started it.
With a little, gusto is a step up for me.
Yeah, I know plenty of Spanglish. I've worked in farming most of my life, so I know when to throw that extra emphasis, as they say, on certain parts of words to have some fun with things. But before we get started, I'll give each of you a second here. Matt, why don't you let everybody know like what you guys got going on and where they can find your work and whatnot?
Yeah, sure. So I do weekly draft streams over at the Sheep Seats on YouTube, and then. Yeah, we started this year stackingdingers.com, playing off the dinger name of the contest and, talking about stacking, which I'm sure we'll do and all that. And we started, we kind of started that with the idea that we were going to do more writing, but what it kind of morphed into so far this year is more of a video podcast type of thing. So we're doing that weekly. Chris is on there often. And just to be clear, all the graphs and everything are totally Chris. Part of why I wanted to start Stacking Dingers was to put my name somewhere near his graphs so I get some of that recognition.
Hey, that's a smart move. I've been great with that. I was on I had Bubba in the bat flip forever. Toby, genius mind. Now I have Bubba in the bloom. Ryan's a pretty smart dude with all his stuff. So, it's all about who you know sometimes than what you know. So I'm with you there, Matt. Chris, where can they find all your stuff? I know you tweet out a ton of it. Your sheets are just legendary. They're so good that even I can figure them out. So that says a lot.
So thank you. The highest compliment. I wanted to get into this stuff with Matt and Brendan to latch myself onto Brendan's stuff because Brendan puts out a lot of great content too. So it's like one, big snake eating its tail. But we were having all these great talks kind of offline. And we figured out that why don't we just do this in front of people and have, our online friends ask us questions and talk about all sorts of things that we would have been talking together anyway. So it's been a ton of fun. Like you said, the Twitter profile is probably the best place where I tweet out most of the graphs and the threads and the sheets and whatnot. But I have promised many people to eventually write an article summarizing this stuff in a nice tidy little package. So before the South Korea games, I can assure the listeners and the watchers of tonight's show and all of our Stacking Dinger stuff, you're going to have an article from me by then.
That's outstanding. And first, I'm glad you mentioned Tuma. Tuma's been on the show a few times. Great individual, great mind as well. So you guys do work very, very well together in that regard. And the article thing, like Matt, you said, you guys, the idea was to write more. And then Chris is talking about writing. Hey, for me, I love podcasts and video. It's a lot easier just to kind of go with. And I know, Chris, you got your charts and everything. Writing sounds fun. It's more work than I think people understand that goes into the process.
Hard.
Yeah. It's like getting the zone. You got to get motivated. Like once you get going, it kind of flows, but it's not just, just open up the laptop and roll thing that people kind of might think it is. So looking forward to it though. In just before Korea, that'll be great. I'm looking forward to that. Most of these drafts will be filled, and it'll be perfect timing for all of this to take place. Before we get into more strategy talk, let's just get to the basics, and I'll go to you on this one, Matt. Can you just recap to everybody what the main format is? How many rounds you have, the kind of how many people, positions you need to start with, so on and so forth?
Yeah, so the Underdog season-long format is a 20-round draft. But it's best ball, so each week you're not selecting your players for the different positions. It's filling in the highest scoring guy at the three positions in this is broken into pitcher, infielder, and outfielder. A little bit of confusion there if you look at the player pool. They do put DH and like some first base DH type players into the outfield pool just to increase the outfield size of the amount of players. And then basically you score in 2 week periods throughout the regular season, and that builds up to a playoff rounds in which those are 1 week periods that you advance from. I guess in the first round, you advance out of the people you draft with into a randomly selected next grouping, and so on until you're into that final round and everybody's playing for pretty much all the money.
Yep, it's a really cool format. Basically, survive and advance, and there's some more even crazier survive and advances that we'll talk about later on. That have, to me, we'll get to that in a minute. Let's not get off the rails already, but let's talk about it. Like Matt mentioned, there's the different positions and all this stuff. So, Chris, I'll go to you on this. We'll start a proper thought process, or a popular thought process is you need to go outfield heavy because, like Matt mentioned, there's a lot of DHs or first basemen that play DH and stuff that they kind of put in the outfield to help us because the outfield pool dries up rather quickly, it feels like, at least talent-wise, where there's always glutton of infielders, and then pitching's a whole other conversation. But Chris, what are you noticing on the trends, I guess, of going outfield heavy? Is it worth it? Is it maybe we're just imagining things, or what are you seeing with that?
So outfield, the first thing you see when you get in your first Underdog draft is that the first 10 picks usually off the board are all outfielders, and it's all like the usual names, but it just so happens that they all line up very well for this format, and they all go like boom 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 boom. Like the first 10 picks almost always go kind of in this standard. These 10 guys go, sometimes you get an infielder mixed in, but like very very often you're getting one of those guys kind of as the anchor of your team. And like you said, Bubba, it's just the problem with outfield is that it dries up so quick. You'll get to like round 4, round 5, round 6, round 7, round 8, and you're starting to look around like, oh, whoa, okay, this is getting dicey here. There's a bunch of pitchers in that range, and the one consistent thing we've always found, like we've done this contest for a couple of years now, and I've looked at the data from each of the past 3 years. 2 years. And the one constant has been that there's always another infielder. Like infield, there's just so many guys that get to play based on the way that MLB teams are structured, and just the simplicity of making it pitcher, infield, outfield means that it's a numbers game, and there's just more infielders. There's more production that's going to come from those guys. So outfield is scarce, pitcher is fragile, and I think infield is deep are kind of the 3 ways that I like to think about it when I'm hopping in my drafts.
Totally agree with you there. Hey, Matt, when you're looking at, we all agree the outfield position is tough. And with it being a points-based system, even guys like Schwarber now become really, really good outfielders. We're like in a 5x5 roto where most of my listeners might come from. His batting average is so bad that's what pushes him down to like the 90th to 100th ADP in a draft. Where in Underdog, like you wouldn't be shocked if he's drafted at the 1-2 turn in some drafts or something. Like that's just the reality of the situation. And for listeners, if you go to Underdog Fantasy, there's a rough like ADP rankings you can just look at on the website. Plus there's sheets and stuff that Chris will dive into later on to help with these things with projections. But Matt, when you're leaving a draft, how many outfielders are you trying to leave with? Since you have to start 3, maybe one's a util, so on and so forth. What's your plans there?
Yeah, so I guess I did not really make that clear in my earlier explanation. You do have each week you get the 3 outfielders, 3 infielders, and 3 pitchers that score from you. So pretty much the name of the game is trying to figure out how you're going to balance all of your picks through the 20 rounds for how you want to be scoring at those positions. Because then, like you said, there is that flex position. So to get back to your question, I'm usually like 6 outfielders for the most part, because while it is scarce, it also does, or part of the scarcity is that the guys at the end that you're picking are a lot less likely to contribute to your lineup, especially with the flex position. Chris pulled some stats from last year, and there was only 1 week through the whole regular season in which there was more outfielders that filled that flex position than infielders. So that's something I've changed coming from last year into this year. Whereas last year I was doing more like 7 outfielder builds. This year I'm kind of limiting myself to 6 most of the time, just because I'm trying to fill that flex position with infielder at the end, potentially a few weeks out of the year.
And that's good to know, because that's kind of one thing. Even I've done a lot of drafts between last year and even this year. I'm doing a lot more. Chris, I told Matt off the air, I forgot to tell you, I'm starting to respect your slow draft world. I have like 5 or 6 going at a time now. It's actually kind of nice and relaxing, and you can kind of like look at the player pool longer and kind of build your team a little differently. Kind of liking it now. I'm starting to all like this tongue in cheek I gave you earlier on your guys' show. I'm starting to appreciate that. But to you, Chris, in that regard, we're talking about taking all these outfielders early, but now, like Matt said, you've done some work, Chris, where maybe the infielders fill in the util spot later because there is so many utils in theory, and as the outfield pool dries down, you still have to fill it, but the quality of the outfielder is different. That leads to my question: when we're taking all these outfielders early, we're passing up on some upper echelon infielders at the same time. Like Freddie Freeman, tons of points like in this system. J-Ram puts up a bunch. Bobby Witt, like these elite guys, but we're maybe not all people, but a lot of people are passing on them to get outfielders. Have we seen a world where maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze just because the position is shorter in the outfield?
So I think one of the fun perks of the format, and one of the fun perks of the contest, the Dinger specifically, we're going to talk just the big tournament first, is that it's a very affordable, $10 price point, and you can throw in up to 150 teams. And like you said, Bubba, those individual infielders have mega upside. Like they could be the guy you need season long, or just week in, week out, or more importantly, they could be the guy you need in the most important weeks where all the money is located kind of at the end of the year. So I think it wouldn't be wise to kind of go into the season and say, I'm doing my 50 drafts, I'm never taking, these upper end infield guys. I think the way that I like to try and think about it is I might not be reaching for them like ahead of ADP, but when they do come to me, I'm going to try and build that specific team in a smart way so that I'm leveraging, their awesome potential as a great baseball player, plus kind of what we know about the other positions. So if I start and I get the 12th pick, that's one of the tougher, I think, spots to pick from. You have kind of missed out on these outfielders. What are you going to do? If you start with maybe the Olsen-Freeman combo, you are behind the ball for sure on outfield and a little bit maybe on pitcher, but your infield is rock solid. So in that case, I'm probably never taking more than 6 infielders, and I'm always going to be wanting to go outfielder heavy for the next couple rounds for sure, and mix in pitchers earlier and really wait on the next infielders.
Perfect. That's kind of where I was leading with that, because the same thing. Like when I first started, I made a point, got to get all my outfielders, got to do it. And then I started doing more drafts, and you talk about like diversifying your portfolio and all those type of things. And I started finding myself, if you had like an 11th or 12th pick, okay, Freddie Freeman's pretty darn good. Like this is fun. Like this is good. If you want to get really weird, Freeman Strider, like things like this. Like, and we'll talk pitching in a minute. But there's ways to be different. But you said you take those 2 picks. Wow. After it comes back to me, there's like outfielder looks rough, like really rough. But you just pound it, like you said. So it's all about kind of learning the pool, and I think it's where it's fun. The price points, you mentioned the Dingers, $10, the bunch, $3. People really want to go play around. Same draft format, just different price point, obviously, different overall prize and everything. So lots of ways to go in there and do this. So we talked about that. If you go outfield early, maybe 6-ish outfielders. If you kind of wait, maybe get a little more aggressive on outfielder. Don't go as deep on infielder. Let's talk starting pitching, because this is something I remember last year when I had Tuma on. We were really talking about how there's all these really good starting pitchers, and there's like a glob of really good starting pitchers. So why don't we maybe get a little more aggressive potentially on starting pitchers instead of waiting until the end? Matt, how are you attacking the starting pitching position in these drafts? Because outfield dries up if you kind of ignore them early. There's these great infielders, but man, some of these starting pitchers pretty darn good, even though we know any pitcher can get injured at any moment. So there is that volatility. So how do you go about it?
So the one thing I do want to highlight is that the whole field is treating it differently this year. Also, it's not just me. So if you look at last year's draft boards and compared to this year, like in the first 5 rounds, there was like 14 or 15 pitchers off the board. And this year it's like 7 or 8. It's like half the amount of people are deciding to spend that upper draft capital on pitching. So ultimately, based on what we saw last year, I've started the season drafting a little bit heavier on these pitchers, but I've, sort of keep up with the field and not like be pumping these guys when I don't have to. And I can play with the field and say, okay, I'm going to get my outfield, infield start, and I have a good core there. And then I can jump into the pitcher pool when the field is too. So I did start out a lot more aggressive this year, like trying to get like a couple of guys in the first 5 rounds, but I've really backed off from that recently.
Okay. Chris, what have you noticed on this basis of pitchers? Like I said, I know you've done research on this. I've seen some of your stuff, even Tuma presented at First Pitch Arizona, some stuff from the previous year, and you're working on some more stuff, obviously more current stuff. So what have you seen on the kind of either early pitching, middle pitching, how pitching affects things in general for this underdog format?
So last year, I was a big proponent of trying to shift your pitchers earlier in the draft and avoid kind of the unknown mess at the end of drafts, and then just take fewer of them overall. Last year, I took a lot of teams that were 6 pitchers with maybe 3 in the first, like 80 picks, 90 picks, 100 picks kind of thing. And those teams did very bad. Not great. Early pitching last year was kind of a minefield. I got DeGrom, people got Bueller. Like there were a lot of names that were going early that did not pan out. And I think we're seeing this year that people feel a little bit snake bit in terms of taking these guys early. And what some of the data has shown with pitchers in the first 5 rounds, the more pitchers you took, the worse your teams did last year in those first 5 picks, partly because of injuries, and then also partly just because of the way that underdog scoring works. Your best hitters are going to score so much more than your best pitchers. They just have the chance to kind of compile these massive scores over the course of a season. But in a single week, an elite pitcher that gets 2 starts is kind of the biggest hammer that you can have. So that's why pitching to me is the most interesting strategic part of drafting, because you kind of have to thread this needle of they're not good. If you look at the projections, it just does not line up. But when it comes down to the money weeks, the teams that gravitate to the top, like the team that won everything last year, they had Blake Snell, and Blake Snell went crazy kind of in the 2-week stretch in the finals, and that was a winner. So I am going to be a little bit less aggressive than last year in terms of early pitching, but I'm going to stay, I think, a little bit ahead of the field still in terms of avoiding the back end guys. I really want to be like done with my pitching, or mostly done with my pitching 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the draft. Like I don't want to kind of get speculative too much late. I don't think that's my personal like skill set in terms of evaluating guys. Like that's outsourced. I'll go watch you guys talk about pitchers. I'll go listen to Eno's stuff. Like that's what we're trusting other people for that. So I'm just going to take like fewer shots there and hope that those few shots, one of them can connect.
Yeah, and I'll just go to this, and we'll come back to some more of this the positional stuff. But you mentioned taking shots that revolves around risks, and pitching's a risky position to begin with. Like I said, any pitcher, we wouldn't be shocked if next thing you know, the guy's walking off holding his elbow. We see that way too many times in baseball, and that's a whole. There's one player just gone on your roster. So are you guys trying to avoid, like Chris basically said, he's more, I want to get him, I kind of want to do my thing, be quote unquote hopefully safer in the risk department. Matt, are you willing to take some more shots on, like, I guess some of these maybe rookies that were kind of speculating on being good this year? I know unique, like quality starts is a big point, so most rookies don't go deep into the games. What are you looking for, I guess, in a pitching profile to make that someone you want to go and draft for your team? Because sometimes boring is great in this format. Just give me 6 innings and don't get destroyed, and that just racks up consistent points. might not have the ceiling of a Strider, but he's also not going to have a floor very often. So what are you looking at when you're building your pitching?
So even outside of pitching, I'm trying to look at this like whole draft period, not just on an individual draft basis. So the true answer is I'm trying to do it all across different drafts. Sometimes where you take a couple of early pitchers, then you feel like you have kind of that core, and then I'm going to maybe wait till the end, and I'm going to take more speculative picks, trying to hit on people that I might not take in a build where I wait a few rounds and start with like, let's say start with like a Framber Valdez, who is a quality start machine, innings machine, or a Logan Webb even. And then I'm going to build a couple of those sorts of pitchers along with some shots. So it really is about balancing it across the whole roster, and also balancing it across all of the drafts that I'm doing. So, I'll have a few where I take maybe 8 pitchers and I just wait forever just to get that in my portfolio, or some I'll do an anchor. But as far as what I'm looking for is it's innings. That's the key when I'm evaluating a guy, is starting with the innings, because that's where the strikeouts come from. That's where, when you break up the individual scoring of the pitcher, the two big chunks are innings pitched and strikeouts. So those are the things I'm thinking about the most when I'm making my player pool. Like, for example, like Yuri Perez is a guy that this year I'm just mostly out on because I'm worried how he's going to get treated. So like I definitely want, especially younger guys, where we see the teams manipulate the innings, even like within a start. I'm usually a lot lower on those than some other people. But like going into this year, like Brandon Pfaadt is a good example. Like at the end, who there's a lot of risk around him. We don't really know what he was, or which version, the old version, the new version, or which version of last season is he going to be this year. But we know that he got a ton of innings, and that there should be no restriction on him. So that's like a guy at the end I'm more willing to take a shot on, just because I know that he's going to get the volume to succeed if he gets the chance.
And that's one of my most rostered players. So we're going to end the show there. And no, I'm just kidding. No, I love Brandon Pfaadt for that exact reason. I guess this is why people like Chris Bassett may be good. Just going to throw it out there. He throws a lot of innings. I don't know. Just going to speculate on that one. I saw your guys' tweet. Haven't got to listen yet, but I have a hunch where that one was going. And it's at least a slow hunch on that one, because I like him for that reason too, for anywhere in the near ballpark on that. But that's a good point. I'm glad you made that about the pitching. It's not always the flashiest guy that's going to go light the radar gun up. That's probably actually the guy you don't want, because they don't go as deep into games. You want the guys that are going to kind of, get you through there and put the innings with the strikeouts up. So I like that quite a bit. You mentioned, sorry,
Chris does have a type, a little more riskier type. So I'd like to hear his answer.
Okay, Chris, what do you got?
He does have a different profile picture that he took.
I was getting a little bit ganged up on yesterday as we were going through our pitchers show, and the way we were doing it, we had like kind of we had all the pitchers listed, and then within the sheet, it's got it just has the bat, NATC, total points, and points per plate appearance. And every couple pitchers we'd go through, we'd hit one of these guys that was like he might throw 120 innings, but those 120 innings might be good. His arm also might fall off. And it just so happened that I liked all of them. And so we got like 2/3 of the way through the list. And Matt's like, okay, so we're at Carlos Rodon. And Chris, you love him. And I'm like, oh, I do. Okay. So yeah, I have a type. I think kind of what Matt said about you're playing for winning in the end across. You need one of your teams to win across all of the teams that you drafted. So I like mixing and matching these kind of slightly riskier guys, and then pairing them with, the Bassetts, the Grays, the kind of the Montgomerys, the Flory guys as well, because I do like, having the out of maybe Hunter Green in the end of August is out of his mind for a week and strikes out 13, someone terribles, and you back your way into that. So I do like having that out, and I do take those guys, I think, a little bit more often than the field does.
A couple things on that, and it makes sense because the Hunter Green thing, he's got that ceiling. I know we kind of talked about in the Dinger show with Zawinski, similar process, but now we're talking the pitcher. You don't have to take his bad starts if you have 3 other good pitchers, but his premium starts you can get. And we know Hunter Green, he's got 13K, 6 shutout upside, a lot. That's an option. At least half his game is not in Great American Small Park. It goes a long ways so that's a great example. The second thing I was going to mention is you mentioned the kind of the Rodon volatility types with the floor. And I have a lot of floor guys with a few of them, but you mentioned Blake Snell earlier. Blake Snell fits that profile completely. He could walk the farm and pitch 4 innings, or what we saw happened, and that led to championships. So I guess if you go too boring, you cap your ceiling in theory. And, you want to kind of be, at least totally correct me if I'm wrong here. You guys have done the data on this. You kind of want to be somewhat safe to have a floor to advance, but as you advance, you need the ceiling to keep advancing and win, if that makes sense in any roundabout way. So when you're drafting, you got the mindset as I want to keep going, but you also have to have the mindset that when I keep going, I need to eventually start peaking at some point in time. So I don't know if you've seen anything on that, or if we can just leave it at that, if that's as simple as it is. But anything around that, Chris, that makes sense? I guess the risk levels you're seeing in teams. Are you seeing, certain players we see contribute all season, but there's always a couple spike guys on every roster that, they might only contribute a certain amount of the time, but that is the game-changing amounts of the time? I don't know. I might just be spitballing things out of my head here.
No, I think you're totally on the right track. And one of the best parts of best ball is you get you don't have the choice to manage your team in the season. You just get what you have drafted, and you get the best of some of these guys when they might be nothing for most of the year. And then you get, their best of the best. The Swinski one was the perfect example. He had those 5 weeks where he was awesome, and then a couple weeks where he was terrible, and then a bunch of middling weeks. And then Stephen Kwan was the guy we contrasted him with. Stephen Kwan was always going to be your outfield 3 or your outfield 4. He wasn't really usually going to be your outfield 1 or 2. So those two kinds of archetypes are what you have to balance on each individual team and then across all of them. One of the things I know that we're definitely going to hit on are some of the different types of contests. And one thing that has, I think, been a product of these other types of contests being available this year is everyone collectively is thinking a little bit deeper about what's your base strategy for the main contest, and then how do you want to shift that for each of these different types, and then really kind of thinking about how you want to change it is also making you re-examine your initial your tenets, the things that you really hold true in that main contest. If you feel a certain way in a different one, maybe you need to re-examine some of those things. So I think the different contest offering has really helped develop some of the discourse about just the big contest as well.
100%. Because game theory just takes it to so many different areas to get our minds working instead of just the same boring, potentially boring, quote unquote, way about things. Hey, Matt, I want to go back to you on this, and we'll kind of hit on infielders here for just a minute because there are so many of them. But so at the same time, there's so many late, but they're maybe not a bunch of power guys. Maybe they're more leadoff guys with speed or whatever. It's all over the board. So when you're building your, I guess I will say offensive side of things, we just hit on kind of what we're looking for in pitching. What are you looking for in your hitters? I know in the end you just want points, guys that get on base, but then you got power guys, you got all these other different things. So in the end, it's maybe just end game thoughts. What are you looking for in a player profile that maybe separates them with so many guys at the end?
Yeah. So, one of the main things is actually not statistics related. It's just if they pair with another player, if they're the stacking element. A lot of times at the end, there's certain guys that will make sense with the rest of the roster. The idea of stacking is that essentially, a few weeks out of the year, when that team is doing well, that the actual real life baseball team is doing well as an offense, you're getting additional correlation between your lineup, and you're getting more points as those guys score together in the actual baseball games. So that's one factor in a lot of the late round infielders that I'm adding. and even a few outfielders. Apart from that, if it's like a guy on his own, at the end, it's definitely someone I want that has a slugging profile with power. Speed isn't really worth as much as you hope it is in this scoring format. So there, I'm just looking for a guy that can have a few spike weeks throughout the year. Someone that, like last year, despite the injury, like Adam Duvall, like helped teams like just score a few weeks, like give them that boost at the beginning of the season to really like propel them ahead, so that they could just like keep up the rest of the season. So even if somebody misses or is bad, like Swinsky is a good example, or like Nolan Gorman is another example. You know, he might not have a great schedule some weeks based on if he's going to be hitting against lefties or not. But the weeks that he gets like a bunch of righties in a row, he has the potential to just like put up a monster week for you and contribute. So it's not someone that I need to contribute every week, but has the ability to either through stacking or through power contribute on certain weeks.
Perfect. Okay. Because yeah, there's always like I have my homer bias. Like Thairo Estrada's always hanging out there, and he's fun because he can maybe hit 15 to 20 home runs if he runs, but he's mainly there to steal bases. Giants don't score a lot of runs, so it's like, is it really worth taking Thairo Estrada? Is that $1 million question? And do we really want to stack the Giants? Probably not. So it's kind of one of those situations there.
Yeah, and that's the perfect example of a guy I would put in with Jorge Soler or Jung Hoo Lee now. So if I have one of those two guys and I'm looking for another infielder at the end, he's going to go into those sorts of teams for me.
Perfect. I want to ask a couple more things before we really get into some other like different formats here. I want to get both your opinions on this. So I'll start with Chris on this one. You mentioned if you have 50 leagues, you have how many ever you do, there is diversification that you want to do. How much do you focus on that throughout your profile? Is it kind of just in the back of your head? Are you making it a point to only have so much of certain people? Like, how do you go about that, Chris?
So this is something that I've struggled with a little bit doing all these slow drafts is you don't get Underdog has a good system for tracking your like player by player exposure once the draft is completed. But as the draft is going, it is a little bit tough to manage kind of like, who's on what team and kind of how many of each I have. So I have a couple of homemade things that help in certain ways. I mostly focus on the beginning of drafts, like maybe the first 3 or 5 rounds. I don't want to be picking the same combos over and over again. So I will track kind of those on my own. And you can, in the app, you can name your teams as you're going. So if you're not like renaming things, kind of if you're a slow draft fiend like myself, I will essentially when a draft starts, I'll change the number to like the number of the entry that I'm on, and then maybe the first like 3 or 4 picks that I have, just so I kind of have that in the back of my mind. But like Matt said, I'll use stacking as kind of the tiebreaker and a way to guide where I go. And I do have a couple of stances where when I start drafting in the contest, I'll be taking more of my guys early on, being like, okay, I need Jordan here. I got a lot of Jordan. I took him, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. I have a bunch just kind of sprinkled all over the first round. And then I got maybe halfway through those bullpen drafts, and I was like, all right, let's check. I got a lot of Jordan. Okay, time to kind of start rebalancing things. So I start heavy on the guys that I have strong feelings about myself, and then I kind of work my way into, finding myself to the guys that I don't like as much. But in, the way that we're playing this game, you do need to have most of your bases covered. So I do want to build some teams, even with the guys that I don't love. I just want to try and build them properly, I guess. So if they do hit, I want it kind of that floor to come with them as well.
It's kind of like, season long, we have our guys we get early. I like to diversify later in drafts. So it's kind of what you're saying there, Matt. How do you go about your player pool diversification?
Yeah, so my strategy changes a little bit as I draft these more and more each year. I definitely 2 years ago, I was a lot more flat in my exposures, and then essentially last year I started getting a little bit heavier, and this year I'm just really leaning in a lot more. Part of that is just because I want to have my guys and just have fun with it. It's like there's a certain
That's
element.
a very valid answer, man.
There's a certain element of underdog after, like, I don't know, just doing it for so long that you're like, that you've lived through the playoff rounds enough that you know that just how much randomness goes into it. So at a certain point, it's like, well, I just want to cheer for my guys throughout the season. So let me be heavy on a couple of guys I want to really cheer for. Additionally, there's a couple of opportunities that I think present themselves at different parts of the year if you're drafting over the whole portion of the season. So the example I have for that this year is Shota Imanaga, who right now we don't really know what he's going to be. Like, nobody's really too confident about the home run rate that he had in Japan, how that's going to translate to the U.S. And so right now he's stuck at a late ADP behind a lot of guys that I think he could eventually pass if he is good. So right now he's my most drafted player, and my plan is to obviously see what spring training brings and see him face hitters, and either he's going to go even later and I'll just back off of him, or he's going to start going a lot earlier and I'll already be sitting with a lot of good draft capital spent on him.
No, that makes sense. I'm with you there. I was just looking at my most rostered, at least in the this new wave of drafts, and it's either Logan Gilbert if you want pitching, or it's Seiya Suzuki when it comes to hitting. So those are two guys I've kind of planted my flags on so far. Chris, I want to go to you here on projections, because I know you do your sheets. A lot of it's based on different projections and whatnot. If anybody's in the draft room, and like I said, you can do it online or on the app. I think I've said it many times, and I'm not alone. The app's amazing. Like, it's so easy to use that it just makes it so much easier makes you want to draft, basically. But there's always a projection next to the ADP, and that's the Underdog's projections. I know you've used the Bat and Steamer and a bunch of different ones. How do you utilize those projections to help you draft? Is it just more of it gives you the values you like? Is there something you see? Is there a projection system you like better? What are you using with projections for Underdog?
So for Underdog, I think the best way to think about projections is it's the foundation of your kind of player take and your team building approach. There are I think the two ones I have in the sheet right now, I know the two ones I have in the sheet right now are the Bat. So that's Derek's amazing system for hitting, especially. I really do think that he is the most on the ball for a lot of those kind of batted ball, and the stuff that he incorporates is really great. And then I have ATC in there as well, because I do think the idea of having a system that pulls from the best qualities of all the other ones has its merits. So those are kind of the two that I have in there currently, and those are the two that I'll probably have for the most part until the season starts. But what I like to use those for is they're most useful when things change. So when the contest opens and ADP hasn't been shaped by a lot of people and a lot of drafts and stuff, the projections can be kind of like your lighthouse, where you're making your way towards something concrete in terms of we know that these systems are good and they can give you at least a starting point to put somebody in the right range. They're not the be all end all. I don't just draft purely off of rank order of who has the most to the least, because there's injuries, there's many things that can change. But I think they are the kind of the foundation and the table stakes. You should just kind of understand how the scoring system works, and it's really helpful to show the types of players, like how Matt was talking about before. Patience and power, I think, are two of the things in hitters that really pop with the scoring. And so now, these projection systems we have don't just give you the 5x5 categories. You can go grab, singles, doubles, triples, homers, walks, hits, steals, caught stealing, everything. So you just take that and add it up, and it gives you something to start with. And it put the guy in the spot. And then we, layer on our own opinions. Like Matt said, it's fun to have player takes. If you just sit there kind of and spout the projections and go from the top down, like you can approach it like that, but I feel like there's more nuance, and I think that the projections are your foundation, and you got to build off that yourself.
Most definitely. 100% agree with that. Matt, do you use any sort of projection system, or do you just do like what I do and use Chris's sheet?
I do use Chris's sheet, but so for me, I think it's really important to understand that the amount of the field that is using those projections also, that's where it is your foundation. Like Chris said, like when I first started, I was just putting in those because nobody was doing it. Like 2 or 3 years ago, nobody was putting in projections to draft. It was just drafted off of whatever. So, as time has gone on and it's more smart people are jumping in the contest and really thinking about it more, they're starting there too. So you definitely need to start there. Like I don't think it's an option. Like you need to do that. I tend to lean towards the bat just because I've come up through the Derek Carty tree. When I first started playing DFS, I just happened upon the bat, and I used it, and was over in the RG Discord, and like he was freely available, and so I talked to him a little bit through there, and I've just come up through that way. But the thing I like to do more is just kind of, instead of now just knowing the exact numbers, I might go look, like if I'm looking at two players and I want to see their points overall and their points per plate appearance, I'll do that when I'm looking at specific guys and comparing them. But really, I want to have like a general sense of what different systems are saying about guys to try and understand where people might be thinking wrong about players. Like if there's a certain guy that's going in a certain place that doesn't make sense to me, like having just a general idea of what the projection systems are saying and then factoring in what people are saying around the industry. Like it's more of a overall approach and understanding like what the field is doing and why they're doing it. So I can either decide that like this draft, I want to go with the field on a certain things, but this is where I want to shift my thinking or shift my thinking on a specific player.
No, it makes a ton of sense. That's what the beauty of projections are, because smart people make projections, and it gives you a good floor, and you can kind of speculate elsewhere and all of that. Let's get to the nitty gritty that I'm really looking forward to on this stacking. You are the Stacking Dingers. You are two of the people on the Stacking Dingers podcast, and it's just a fun conversation because I think there's obviously ways to win without stacking. You just get the best players and they run hot, and you do this. You mentioned the DFS mindset, Matt, is you just like trained, you got to stack to win a GPP. That's what they tell you. Like you just go through it. Again, you don't have to, but it helps because when that team goes off, your whole team goes off. And it's just one of those kind of scenarios here. So I'm going to start with you on this one, Chris. I know you've done a lot of data on this and kind of looked into the last year or so, maybe 2 years even, whatever. But what are you seeing with stacking? Like how fruitful is this for teams? How necessary is it? Is there maybe a better pockets to look at? What are you seeing when it comes to stacking at teams?
So we came up with the name before I did the research. So it's actually all just to make the name work. I haven't told these guys yet, but I felt like it was appropriate to break it on this show. So it's
awesome.
Actually it's a little bit dicey. But no, that was one of the most fun ones to work through. Was how do you think about it? How do you kind of quantify it? And how do you interpret it? And when I got through to the results, which were overwhelmingly positive in terms of you should be stacking more than you currently are, I was a little bit like, oh, okay, nice. Like this is something that we can like really, really use and work with. And so basically the way that I went about it was looked at all the teams over the last year that were drafted, counted up the number of players that were paired with teammate or teammates on a draft team, and totaled them. So if you had 3 Red Sox, 3 Yankees, and 3 Rays, I gave you credit for having like 9 kind of stacked players total. If you only had 2 paired, that was like a 2 kind of thing. So looked at all that, and the relationship that we found was basically that the more total hitters you stack, the better you do on a weekly basis, on a season-long basis. For advancing out of round 1, you do better. For advancing through the second round, you do better. For winning the final, you do better. Like, it was kind of this force multiplier across your whole draft that you could use. And the interesting bit to me was that we were very just looking at I'm looking at the bars right now, and we were very undecided on how to tackle this last year. Some things we're pretty strongly convicted on. Like, if you're taking total number of outfielders, it was like, I think 90% of teams took either 6 or 7. That was it. Like, there was really no other debate. This was like very spread out. You had people taking none, you had people taking 12. Like, it was very different. And it was fun to find that there's like this something out there that we talk about in so many other contexts. Like, it's such a part of the DFS discussion. It's such a part of the football discussion. And it really hadn't made its way into best ball for baseball yet. And that's like one of the goals of this offseason, is to bring it up as often as possible, because I think it's really something you can use to help your teams.
I really wish you guys didn't, but I appreciate it because, like I said, I have the DFS background where that was like my first insight going into the room. Okay, how do I stack this guy with this guy? And well, the ADP's here, and then just throw ADP out the window. Let's get the stacks. Let's see what we can do and go from there. So, Matt, I'll go to you on this one. When you're building your stacks, and Chris kind of mentioned different quantities of players on rosters, what are you finding maybe that you like, or what you guys have looked into some more or whatnot of? Do you want 3 or 4 guys from a team? Do you want just one main stack and then other pieces from other teams on there? Do you want multiple stacks, multiple teams, like 2 stacks on a team? Like, what are your senses when you're building your rosters that you like to at least maybe even if you want to just say for 2024 so far?
Yeah, so I think the most one of the important things to think about when you're building a stack is the team that you're actually stacking. So if it's a high scoring team, I'm much more comfortable going up to that 4 people main stack. So balancing that along with the draft capital you're spending on it is the thing that I'm thinking about. So like if you're stacking the Braves, for instance, you're spending a lot of early round picks on it, but by saying that I want to spend all this draft capital on it, I'm saying that this team's going to be super good the whole year again. So maybe I want to get a little bit larger on that stack. I'm throwing in, maybe getting as crazy as throwing in Orlando Arcia at the end as my last infielder. But the team is important. Like if I'm stacking, like you mentioned, we were talking about the Giants earlier. I don't really want more than 2 Giants. So it's really about what the draft is giving me, what my first few picks are. It's like sort of a balancing act, just like you're trying to balance your position distribution, but you're also trying to balance the stacking distribution. So you really don't want to get too close-minded about it because that could ruin other opportunities. Like if there's a certain guy that's just falling in your room that it doesn't make any sense. Sometimes you want to get out of that stacking mindset to grab that piece. And then you can continue your stack later, or maybe you shift now to that other team. So it's really about being fluid, but generally 3 or 4 or 2, just like groups of 3 here, groups of 2 here, maybe a 4 there, and then doing a couple of teams on each, couple of real baseball team stacks on each team that I draft.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of where I've been falling into is a couple 3-mans maybe. Like I've gotten fortunate on these latest slow drafts to get the first pick twice out of these. So I got like Acuna, and then somehow I came back to Michael Harris and like Ozzie Albies. I'm like, what are we doing right now? This feels too good. So then I come back with Kellenic later. So I have 3 outfielders now, plus it's a 4-man Braves, and I can't wait to see it fail. But it feels real good when you're doing it. I'll tell you that much. But it's also fun. You kind of mentioned the mixing and matching here. is the more you do these drafts, you can start to see the stacks. Like certain teams are more outfield heavy stacks, but there's other teams where you have an infield heavy stack, like the Brewers per se, and you could kind of mix and match. And now it's like a puzzle piece where you have like maybe 3 infielders and an outfielder here, and then 3 outfielders and an infielder here, and you got 2 pretty strong stacks, and then kind of go around. I know I'm not alone in this. You guys are shaking your head. You're seeing these things. Chris, when you're like, just say for 2024, for instance, or with your data, are you seeing any kind of, I guess, correlations on, these infield heavy stacks versus outfield heavy stacks type situation, or just kind of team dependency?
I haven't looked into the positional stuff as of yet, but what I would say
What are you
is
waiting
that
for? I'm just kidding.
I know. I'm once I actually maybe get something ever, I'm gonna get deep in the weeds on some of this golf stuff that's coming up.
I can't wait to see that, man, because I'm tilting Justin Thomas missing a cut at an elevated event right now. So
yeah, so that's another topic for another day, but that's a place where I actually will like dig in and do the work myself. Baseball is a lot of me just kind of translating the projections of other very, very smart people. Golf is like, we're going to get in the lab and do some stuff. So we'll be back. But on this topic, there's 2 other like stacking-ish things that I wanted to layer on. So you guys were talking about the biggest kind of like the stack size, like from an MLB team, how many guys do you want to take? So I found that last year, most underdog teams, like the biggest stack they were taking was only 2 players from a team. So only pairings of teammates. 60% of teams that were drafted last year took only 2 from the same MLB team as like their biggest stack size.
Wow.
So that means that there were about 25% of teams where it was a 3-man stack as the biggest, and only 5% where 4-man stacks were the biggest. So to me, just without looking at kind of the even like the results or the success of these things, I would kind of want to just be on the end where less people are, because I think we're so early still, we don't really know for sure. So I was already like, okay, let's push this maybe out, take a 3-man, take a 4-man, 5, maybe a little bit aggressive, but like 3 or 4, definitely like feel free. Then I checked how those teams did. Those teams, every time you went up, like with your stack size, if you went from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, those teams got better and better and better. The best one out of this like set that I found were the teams that actually stacked 5 guys from the same team. It's probably a bunch of Braves teams.
I was about to say, yeah.
But if you find the Braves, then you can like really hammer this thing home. So I've been trying to build teams with bigger stacks this year, taking 3 guys from the same team, taking 4 from the same team, and trying to like lean into that a little bit. So that's kind of one other way that we can think about it.
Just real quick, I'll ask you, and then I'll go back to Matt. So if you are doing these bigger stacks, the 4-mans, maybe even a 5, now are you mainly doing just one team and then sprinkling in ancillary pieces? Or are you still trying to get a second like mini stack in there? Chris.
I'll spread it out. I'll probably hit that one team hard. Like, what's a fun one? Texas. Texas is a fun one where you could just like, they got options kind of all over the place, and you can pick up a piece here, a piece there. Like they're kind of spread out nicely where it builds on itself. And then it's like, oh, well, what's one more Ranger? Like, so you just kind of add and add and add. And then I probably wouldn't double down with another big team. I would, like you said, pick up, 2 Red Sox, go pick up 2 Royals, like that kind of thing. So get your big one and then spread it out is probably like a reasonably aggressively balanced way to go.
Matt, for the stack building we are doing is, sometimes you have to be aggressive to get your pieces because they won't come back to you, aka throw ADP out the window. That does happen. That also means knowing the pool, knowing when you can wait, when you have to go. How often do you see yourself going, okay, maybe it's the way the draft started. I have this team, not like I wasn't walking into the room going, I have to have this team, but okay, we started out, we got the Cubs or whoever, we got this. Now, do you see yourself, as the draft goes on, are you forcing the issue of I'm going to jump a couple rounds and just start filling these stacks out? Or do you kind of just, play chicken maybe with the situation?
Yeah. So one of the benefits of having the price point and everything and the kind of portfolio idea is that I don't have to worry. Like, I don't feel like I'm dead if I don't get that stack on this team. So it's definitely being fluid. And playing chicken, I will go a round or so out of ADP to get a stack. Cubs are a good example. Like just knowing when certain players go. So like if you're building a team and you're looking at the outfield options in like the third round, I think the third or fourth round, and you're like, I see Ian Happ a little bit ways down the field, or down the ADP slide, and I'm comparing him to who I'm looking at now. Like, I'll maybe think, okay, I'll go reach him now because I want to start that stack because I know when the draft gets around to me, Seiya Suzuki's probably going to be there. But if I wait, Happ's not, I'm not going to get those two guys together. So that's an example of where I will reach. But overall, I'm not super worried that the stack I start is going to like be where I end. And sometimes it just blows up, and then that's that lineup, and then I'll do better on the next one.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was just curious. I'm starting to jump things. All right, before we start talking contests, anything else from either one of you on stacking you want to hit? Like we could, yeah, okay. Chris has, so I know we could probably go forever on this topic. I don't want to keep you guys all night. So, what else you got on this one, Chris?
So this is the one. This is the one that we need to just hit on last with stacking. The scoring period on Underdog is 1 week long. So you get Monday to Sunday, accumulate your points. It rolls over the next week, and so on and so forth. Like Matt talked about before, the playoffs, slightly different animal. It's still that 1 week period. Things reset in the same pod. You then play another week. So it's like 2 individual weeks. You combine all the points, or combine each total, and you go on like that. So we really hadn't looked into what does weekly scoring look like, because most projection systems, it's all season long. You have DFS very focused on that night slate, season long very focused on the course of the season. But this is a weekly game at its core. And so I wanted to look at things that changed your weekly performance last year. So what I did is I took every team and turned every week of last season into a mini tournament. So we counted up the points and figured out the ranking of all the teams from like 1 to 55,000, and then treated it like 25 basically years of stuff and looked at who did good and who did bad. One of the biggest changes from if you were like, this was good season long, but it was better like weekly, was stacking hitters. The more hitters you stacked, the better your weekly team, your weekly score was. Even better than the good season-long score you had. Weekly, it was even more impactful. So that was like another one that logically, I think makes sense. We know in DFS stacking is good and very important. We know in season-long it's probably good, like over the aggregate, but it's less impactful just because of the time. Weekly is that gray area in between. And I think that like some of this shows that you can use this on to leverage your like weekly score and boost things. So stacking good season, better weekly.
And I think that makes sense because if you take, say, 4 from a team and the team even does just like decent for the week, at least maybe 2 of those 4 guys contribute. Where if they crush for a week, you get them all. It's one of those things. Like the good teams rarely go ice cold for that long. Like maybe it's 1 week, but not a long duration. So you're still getting pieces of the pie. Where if you're picking one dude in baseball of all sports, like it's not like one running back on a good offense. It's just one dude that could literally go in a 2-week slump and then still crush. Like Julio Rodriguez won leagues last year, and probably people thought halfway through the guy was garbage for for what you paid for. So that's the kind of point I'm trying to make. Like as a standalone, whatever. But to your point, it makes a lot of sense. You start thinking about the whole. Basically, you're maximizing your potential in theory.
Exactly.
I think that's my dumb brain trying to spell it out right there. But again, if you guys want more stacking stuff, go check out Stacking Dingers. Like they got a bunch of it. Like I said, I could literally talk to them all day, but I know someone has a stream in about an hour, so I don't want to like keep this going. And I really, really want to hit on these new tournaments. Like this is the just awesome because I follow I think it's Underdog Tournaments, Underdog Drafts account, whatever it's on Twitter. And it's like a new one will pop up and like I'll send it to Ryan or something. And we're like, dude, this looks awesome. Like this is crazy. So we have the dinger we've pretty much been talking about. That's a season long multi-entry, so on and so forth. You have the bunt, same category, but it's more like a 20 max or whatever. Different price point though, but same concept. All right, let's talk about the solo shot first. This is a single entry. This is music to my ears when I play DFS. I like single entry, 3 maxes. Let's really get the brass tacks here. So you can't just throw a lotto ticket out there because you put 100 leagues in and it hits gold. Like, you could still do that in the solo shot. Don't get me wrong, but it even, to me, it evens things out. I could be crazy. So we'll start with Matt on this one, because I know Chris has some really deep thoughts on this one. So we're going to go to Matt here first. What's your thoughts on the solo shot, and how are you approaching it in comparison to these dingers we've been talking about?
Yeah, so I think I'm thinking about it differently than you are. In the fact that you're really thinking about the single entry factor of it.
Okay.
And I don't think that is the most important part of that contest. The most important part of that contest is the advancement structure compared to the dinger. So in the dinger, you're drafting with your pot of 12 people, and then the top 2 scores from that main scoring period move on. And then I think it's what is it? Is it 2 from there? Yeah, and then it's 2 out of 10, and then 1 out of 10, and then there's a 280 person final. Whereas when you look at the solo shot, out of your pot of 10, 4 players are advancing out of that regular season round. And then from there, it's 3 out of 12, 3 out of 10, and then you're only up against 18 people in the final if you get there. So that, to me, is actually the most important part of that contest.
That's a great point.
When you're comparing it. So in that case, you're taking less risk because of those elements. Or at least that's how I look at it. And I'm less focused on getting, a big stack that's going to go off at the right times. I'm more focused on trying to build a team that has a little bit more of a floor to get me to that top 4. And I'm not really too worried about just having one shot at it.
I didn't even notice. There you go. I should probably read the actual contest. I just got excited as a single entry thing. I'm like, this is awesome. So that makes a lot of sense. On paper, that many teams advance each round, but in the end, not as many teams advance compared to the big dance. So that's even more my wheelhouse. I'll take my chances against 18 guys all day compared to hundreds of people. So that's interesting.
You might not necessarily need that exact 2-star pitcher in the finals when you're only up against 18 people.
That's very, very interesting. Chris, what are your thoughts on attacking the solo shot?
So Matt hit the number one point on my list, was that the advanced structure is different, and you are rewarded differently for advancing in this tournament than the other ones. So just have that in the back of your mind. But for me, the single entry and kind of these lower entry tournaments that are available, this one being the $75 single entry at the moment. I haven't drafted mine yet. I'm gonna wait till I can get somewhere where I can draft it, and then I'll do it and slowly pick my way through it in like maybe 3.5 weeks or so. But I'm gonna come into that one with my convictions about a couple things. I'm gonna draft a structured team that's going to have probably either 6 or 7 at every position, and that's it. I'm not going to take 5. I'm not going to take 8. Those are kind of the 2 things that I believe are good. So I'm going to do that for sure. I'm probably going to do a little bit of stacking, just maybe not the big one like Matt talked about, but I will sprinkle 2s and 3s like all the way kind of through my hitters. And then I will be a little bit less cautious with ADP, and I will get some of the guys that I do believe in, partly just for this is the one shot to kind of make your mark with this player pool in this tournament. So I'll go out with kind of the guys that I do believe in, and ADP I think matters a little bit less in this smaller field, shorter time span type deal. So I'll be less concerned with that. Kind of those are my biggies for this attacking this one.
So go get your guys is what it comes down to.
Go get your guys.
I am I am waiting on to fire that too. I want to wait as
So am
close
I.
to the season.
Yeah.
I think everybody is.
I want to
just
see
get
guys
the most
sign.
information.
Like I guess these more guys sign and stuff. Like injuries will happen throughout all of spring. That is what it is. But yeah, I want to know where some of these guys are playing, especially for stacking purposes. Like Bellinger might elevate in value because he signed somewhere else. Could decrease in value if he signs somewhere like for what I'm trying to build. At least that's my 2 cents. Just like not off the wall questions. I was looking at it on the platform while you're talking. I figured maybe some of these drafts they would do fast only, but there's still a slow draft option for this one. Do you feel that there's a major edge in a thing like a single entry to do the slow so you can analyze it for 8 hours compared to the fast shoot from your hips? Like you guys know the pool, you guys know what you want. That might not matter as much in a fast, but say for somebody that, it's maybe their first year in Underdog, they fired off 20 dingers or whatever, and they're going to go into this. And they're like, I want to do really well, but I don't want to be caught off guard. Do you find a difference? Maybe either one of you guys can answer that.
As the slow draft, I don't even know what title to attach to it. I'm just going to say slow drafter. I think that's a good way to kind of invest your time into this particular contest. If you're playing the dingers and playing the bunts and kind of, managing your bankroll and figuring out like what's the best way to spend these $75. If you want to put it in the slow shot, I do think that, if you're going to be dedicated to pay attention and make sure that you make all the picks and kind of stay on top of what's happening, I totally think that's a great way to kind of go about it. It lets you really think about each of these picks and churn through like, what are my options? What does my team look like? Where do I go from here? So I think that's totally viable for this.
Matt, I'll go to you with this question. We see it with other tournaments, but they're usually the bigger tournaments, like when one fills, a new one comes in. Say they create like 3 total solo shots by the time it's all said and done. How do you foresee yourself differentiating compared to, the mindset of there's only one, I'm going into it doing this? Do you see yourself getting much different than the other ones, or how do you how would you hypothetically play that out?
Yeah, I don't think I would play more than one. Just
Okay.
That's just a bankroll element for myself. Part of the wonders of Underdog is that I know that the regular season is coming, and I love the dailies there too. So personally, if I'm gonna, I need to control myself. I should say, like I need to plan ahead, and if I don't, I'll just keep clicking. So I can't really say that I would do more than one of those. If it looks like it's gonna fill, I might jump into this one, or I might decide not to. Yeah, there also is the perfect game draft, which is a similar advancement structure with that similar price point. That I am doing a handful of those as part of my bankroll plan. So I'd probably focus there more than just keep firing at the solo shot. But I will say that the slow draft, like when it comes to the higher price point too, it might be beneficial for you because then you're getting more time on that team and enjoying it more, just having more fun. I know, like as I'm firing off the $10 teams, even if I'm doing slows, I have a tendency just in my brain to spend less time on them because I know I'm doing a bunch of them, even in the slow drafts. So I think that is a good way to do the single entry higher dollar contest as a slow, just because you can take your time and enjoy it, like a nice steak at a restaurant. Sit down and you don't wolf it down like the burger from McDonald's while you're driving in the car.
Fair enough. Any other final comments on the solo shot before we move on to the next crazy? Okay. This one was very enticing. I know Big John Legeza has messaged me about this and some other ones. This eliminator format is electric. And it's kind of a thing we've seen in even season-long fantasy football has done it for a little while, where you eliminate teams, but then their players come in, you can add and drop. Obviously not the case in best ball formats. This is the team you went to the dance with. So I'll let you start with this one, Chris. What's your thoughts on this eliminator structure and how we go about this? This is a $50 entry, and obviously, based on the word eliminator, things change a bit.
This is so much fun. This was really the one when they were toying around with what types of contests they wanted to do. I was like, guys, let's eliminator. Like this is we need an eliminator, because the week in, week out, the best part of the best ball season is like the last week before an advancement happens or in the playoffs, when you're like, oh my God, like, Ronzi Contreras has 2 starts this week. Like maybe he's the guy you need. So you get that sensation every week here, which is going to be great. So the idea here is you don't need the maybe season-long ceiling that you would in some of these other contests. What you need is to not die in a single week. So building up your floor and building up, I think, balance is kind of the best way to approach this. I did some preliminary looking at what I am calling like survival rate among the different positions. So if you drafted 7 pitchers, how many pitchers did you have on average by the end of the season, to see how many kind of went away? And what I found is if you started with 7, you ended with 4.9. So right there, like just by the time you got to the end of the year, there's 2 pitchers, TJ, see you next year. Like you're down to 5 if you're lucky. So here, I think that the big shift in thinking is pitcher is the position that gets hurt the most and the most severely. If you get hurt as a pitcher, you are more likely to be done for a longer time than as a hitter. So I want to build up a little more floor with my pitchers. So here I'm probably never taking less than 7 and probably taking a good amount of 8-pitcher teams as well, and just trying to hit on some guys that feel less risky and less likely to blow me up in a single week. But the main game here is going to be health, which we obviously can't predict, but we can try our best to minimize the downside by building some balance. I think at every position is a good overall way to go about this.
Yep, the balance, but I like the call on the pitching because that's clutch. Obviously, you're not going to be able to advance eventually if you don't have enough players to pretty much get the job done, or you're throwing out not the best options at the end. Matt, how are you looking at this eliminator format? Is like you guys, I know Chris, we saw was excited about it. I think it's amazing. So I think this is one I kind of hope they throw it multiple times throughout the year just to have some fun, throw little tournaments out there. But what's your thoughts on this one, Matt?
Yeah, so I played the football version of this. That was the first time they put out this sort of guillotine style contest on Underdog. So I did jump into the football one this last year, and my initial thought also was, hey, I want to play this safe, and it didn't work. I'll be honest, it did not work. I don't know if it was exactly user selection or maybe just general idea is wrong. And it's definitely the first thing people, when they see it and they see the style, they say, oh, hey, this is where I want to take Stephen Kwan. And like, I'm maybe I'm overreacting to my unsuccessful football run in this style, but I think I still want to build a lot of ceiling into my teams because I'm not trying to get, just thinking about how the players score each week. You're definitely still taking 6 or 7. Like Chris said, I'm still want to be more balanced. But of those 6 players or 7 players at a position, like what does, if I still have 7 like high slugging guys, like I want 3 of those guys to go off, and I feel like that's just as good as having a bunch of floor guys. So I guess I'm thinking about it a little bit differently. And the other thing that you see if you do these drafts is everybody's thinking about it this way. Pitchers go earlier. Stephen Kwan goes earlier. So in these rooms, I think it's really smart to see what, like even more so than the dinger rooms, like to see what other people are doing and try to react based on that. So like there's certain guys that'll fall way more than they would in the dinger rooms. Like the people that have thought of as more fragile in their projections, like they'll fall a lot further. So like positioning yourself to be able to get some of that value, because it's going to be more extreme in these rooms. So like just maybe being heavy on a position early and then get a bunch of outfielders early and then just taking the pitching and the infielding that falls is another kind of idea I've toyed with a little bit.
I think one of the things that you want to think about here is like the having a dead roster spot is really hurtful. Like, we know that that's bad, like just kind of from a season long perspective. It's not, you want a full team when you show up to the finals. Here it's like, I think it's magnified. So one of the things to consider when you're planning out your next 6 weeks do we have, I think, until the season starts on Underdog. I would want to lean late with these teams. I want to know kind of as much as possible about the situations, and somebody's going to get hurt between now and then. Somebody's going to end up in a bad, positional split. There's a trade. There's all sorts of stuff that can happen. So I would be leaning late or slow with these. I think more information is your friend in this, especially at the beginning of the year when we know more than we're ever going to know. And like Matt said, on an individual player basis, we probably overestimate how well we can tell safe from risky. I think that's just something that we are overly confident in ourselves. Like, oh no, this guy, Stephen Kwan's safe. Like, that probably true, but we're probably a little bit too convicted of that. So I would say don't be afraid to, take the guys that are presumed risky, as long as you are building correctly around them. Like, that thing about structure and foundation, I think applies here 10 times.
Yeah, I think I really, between the risky part, but the waiting part, I agree with completely. In NFBC for season long, they have the Gladiators, but they do them in December and January. I haven't even looked back at mine yet this year because last year I did 3. I had Trevor Story on all 3, so that was fun right out the gate. I ended up finishing 4th place in 2 of them. They fought back because it's just a long draw. But in this format for Underdog, my team probably got eliminated before I had a chance to compete in the end, which is a different animal. So I do like that. The more info, the better. See what more injuries come out and see where it goes from there. So, all right, I'll ask you guys this, and we'll go with Matt, then Chris. Any other strategies on roster constructions, just in general stuff with Underdog? Can be any format you guys want to talk about, and then I'll have a couple 2024, just kind of quick hitter thoughts. And anything else strategy-wise, roster construction-wise, anything from you, Matt?
I think the thing that for new players to Underdog that they really want to think about is how many drafts they're going to do. So all of these things that we're talking about, stacking, jumping guys in ADP, waiting on certain players. Do I want this risky profile? All of that is in the light of, I'm doing a bunch of these drafts and I want to take advantage of these things over multiple drafts. But if you're someone coming into it and you want to do, say, 25 drafts, I almost think you can throw all of this out the window. Just do what you want and have fun. It's just we get so deep sometimes into these discussions just because we love it, and we're going to be doing a lot of it. But I do want to really just emphasize that think about what your plan is and stick to a plan, but also just make sure you're having fun.
Number one thing in fantasy, it's supposed to be fun, people. That is the number one thing, no matter what. Chris, any other final kind of roster protection strategies, anything like that?
Just pick the healthy guys. Yeah, whoever's going to be good and alive.
Pick the good players, guys. Pick the good ones.
Pick the good players. No, I think we hit on all of the big ones that we kind of get the most questions about, and these other contests have opened doors to talk about other things in other ways that are really fun and unique, and I'm excited to definitely dig into these more as we kind of get closer to the season.
All right, so we'll kind of go quick hitters here. For 2024, just in general, we did a broad scope of stuff. But for you, Matt, is there any interesting trends that have stood out to you that you kind of wow, that's kind of new, and maybe more so it's stuck so far this season?
Yeah, the first thing we already kind of touched on, pitchers and the field valuing pitchers less than previous season. So I won't really talk too much about that. But the other interesting thing for 2024 is that this contest has a handful more of the prospect early call-ups available in the player pool compared to last season. So just due to back-end whatever stuff from Underdog, basically previously it was just whoever was on the 40-man roster when the contest came out. That was where their player pool got generated from. So this year, shout out Numi, our friend of the show and our show, and we've been talking to him. I mean, we used to chop it up when he was playing, but now he works there and he's kind of running some of this stuff and putting these player pools together. He worked behind the scenes to get us more prospects available. So like the Wyatt Langfords and the Jackson Churios, who might have not even been in this contest. So that has been interesting this year, seeing how people react to them, especially having the previous 2 seasons where we had the Julio like rise and the Corbin Carroll rise of last year. So it's been interesting seeing how people treat these players and like are they assuming that, and I think it's safe to say that where these guys are being drafted, everybody's assuming one of these guys is going to be the Julio of this year. So I don't know. I don't know how I'm treating it yet. I'm still working out my strategy, and because as I said, I've come up through the Cardi system, so I have a little bit less shine on flashy prospects in my head. Just how I've been thinking about it for a while, but we've definitely seen those successes and in the last few years, and now people they're willing to spend draft capital on these guys.
Yeah, I'm usually scared of those young kids, so I don't have a whole lot of shares of those, and that could be my detriment. But Chris, anything that stood out to you so far?
I have a prediction for the rest of the draft season. I think where we're headed is, so last year we ended very bullish on like a lot of these pitchers, especially the upper end guys and the mid tier guys. It very pushed up the board and things kind of went, yeah. So they've started out, I think, like Matt said, if you looked at where, all the pitchers are this year compared to last year, it's all kind of later. I think by the time drafts finish and the season starts, we're right back to where we started. And I think pitchers are going to get pushed up. So I think if you have pitchers in the next couple of weeks that you're really you have strong takes on, and you think that they might become popular, like I think that the wheels on pitcher are going to start going, and it's going to build momentum, and people are going to start taking these guys like maybe 5-10 picks ahead of where they go now. So that's my prediction for where we're headed.
I like it. Any players that you seem to have a lot of shares, too many shares? You're kind of concerned you have so many shares right now? I'll start with you, Matt.
I have 2 that are very concerning to me. One is a pitcher. I said Shota was my highest owned pitcher. It's actually my second highest owned pitcher is Seth Lugo, who just has not moved from the last round. And like we saw the inning, like the whole, I mean, he's not great. Like it's totally about innings. He's going to pitch in KC. They need him to cover innings. So like a lot of times, like he's just my last pitcher on so many rosters, but it's still scary because like, do we know if he actually is a starting pitcher or does he just get lucky last year after coming out of the bullpen?
It's a great question, and I've stared at that name on draft boards many times in these underdog rooms. So I know what you're talking about. What about you, Chris?
So last year I DeGrommed myself like way to oblivion and just ended up in a bad place with so much. It looked so good for like 3 or 4 weeks, and then the wheels fell off. Who could have seen that coming?
Yeah.
But this year I have affixed myself to a couple of guys. The one that I feel good about is I have a lot of Riley Green, and I think Matt does too. He falls in a nice range for me of outfielders where I'm getting him as like my 3rd or 4th kind of guy in. And I think the ceiling is huge. And I really think that he kind of got derailed a little by injuries. And if that hadn't happened, we might be talking about him in like a totally different part of the draft. So that's the one that I feel good about. The one that scares me every time I look at it is 21% Mike Trout in the second round, and that's not cheap Mike Trout, like where he's going now, like on 2-3 turn. That's like mid late second. Like I have some 1-2 turn Mike Trout teams just because I'm unapologetic Mike Trout believer. and maybe we get the good month at the right time. But that one scares me a little bit. But I can't quit, and I'm not going to quit. So no one try and talk me out of it between now and opening day. But yeah, that one I need a little bit of help.
Yeah, it's understandable. I can feel you on that one. Let's talk stacks just real quick. Who are your most popular stacks potentially, Matt? And throw in one surprise stack. Like, I've found myself occasionally finding a weird Pittsburgh stack there or stuff like that. So, who's like your favorite one? Let's not say the Braves, and and then throw in a surprise stack.
So I think I don't know, maybe it's both the surprise and not, but it's the Cubs. I mentioned it earlier that the Ian Happ, Seiya Suzuki, and then later Dansby Swanson, that 3-man stack is probably, or even just 2 of those guys together is probably like, again, it's not a huge stack, but that combination, just where they're going, makes sense for me. I think they are good where individual picks, where they're going based on who's they're being drafted around. And I think the combination there is good too. And maybe even like throwing a perspective or like prospecting with a Bellinger as part of that if he goes back there, or so that's one. The other, maybe the surprising one that is kind of interesting is actually the Angels. So you start with Trout, and then you can get Taylor Ward at a really reasonable price. Obviously, we don't know exactly. I mean, his injury last year shouldn't affect his baseball skills, so like that's not a factor. I think people are just a little bit too down on him. But then they have a bunch of young infielders, and so we didn't really get to this concept at all. But the idea of having someone on your roster that isn't drafted in every draft, where you're gaining leverage on the field by having one guy that could potentially have just a few good weeks or be the guy in the playoffs, and like just you're in the finals and no one has Zach Neto. Like nobody's going to pick him or like he's drafted in like 15% of drafts. So it, like building guys into stacks late like that is really interesting to me too. So I don't have a ton of it, but it is a little bit off the wall of a stack that I don't think too many people are doing.
I think it's safe to say you might be one of the Lone Rangers on the Angels, and the strategy makes sense. I get where you're going. It's like a DFS mindset right there, 100%. So I get that. What about you, Chris? What's one of your more popular ones, and maybe a surprise one?
So I'm just looking at the list here. My most popular one as of now is Boston. Any kind of combination of Red Sox to me right now is fun. I got a lot of Devers. I got a lot of Casas. I got a lot of Tyler O'Neill, which doesn't feel great.
Weird clicking that button every time.
Yes. Very. It just feels so good. The two that I did not have, and when me and Matt did our exposure review maybe a month or so ago, he has a lot of Trevor Story, and I want some of that. Trevor Story is a very nice, affordable price on Underdog, and I think he's one that I'm really going to target just as like he could be your 5th or 6th infielder, and like if he's healthy and whatnot, like I think he could do good things. And we just got Jarren Duran news that he's going to be the leadoff hitter, so that's another one that I need to correct. If I think this team is going to hit better than expected, he is going to have to be a big part of that. So between those 5 guys, like that's the core of a lot of nicely priced stacks that I have, and I've been mixing and matching kind of around.
And you can throw in Vaughn Grissom for that concept that I was talking about earlier, to those Boston.
The unique one, yeah.
The guy that's not drafted.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. What's kind of a surprise one for you, Chris?
Let's scroll the list here. We'll go double down on the Riley Green. Well, I got a lot of Tigers. I got a lot of Riley Green, a lot of torque. a good bit of Kerry Carpenter as well. So between those three, I got a lot of mixing and matching there. I have zero Javi Baez, so that you can someone else can go there and find
someone else get unique with that one.
Yeah, exactly. I think I have Mark Canha drafted, and I haven't drafted Javi Baez yet. So I'm gonna play around with some of those. But that's a fun one. I have some late Cardinals stuff too. Mixing and matching some, like Nolan Gorman was a name that got brought up before, some Brendan Donovan, like just there's pieces around, and maybe an injury or a trade gives us some clarity. So I'm just going to take cheap shots and maybe one of them lands.
The Cardinals one is interesting. The more I've thought about it recently, but your Cubs and your Red Sox, those are some that, like you said, they fit really not easily, but you don't have to take it super early outside like a Devers maybe, or if you want to go Horner or something, but you can kind of fill it in with that, which is really nice. I'll just give two off the wall ones that for me. I mentioned the Pirates, like as Zawinski, Reynolds, like Brian Hayes is fun. It's really fun, but I have way too many like mini Guardians ones because they're so cheap. They're so cheap. Not sure how I feel about it, but Jimenez and outside of J-Ram, obviously, but Naylor and just it's the more I talk about it, I don't want to talk about it anymore. But yeah. All right. I have one more question for you before we get to listener questions. And this is just kind of your thoughts in general on Underdog. We'll start with you on this one, Matt, with the same question for both. How do you think the competition has changed over the years now as more people are playing baseball, more data is coming out? We know football is the monster. A lot of people play it, but a lot of kind of just novice people play it too, which kind of might even things out a little bit per se. But baseball, I feel like it was the diehards early, but you might be getting more people now. So I'll start with you, Matt. How do you think the competition has changed throughout the years?
Yeah, it's simple. It's getting better. Even though there was more diehards, like you said at the beginning, there wasn't as much thought put into it. And a lot of people are coming to it with, a few years ago, there wasn't a ton of best ball, general best ball thinking hadn't really super been developed, especially in the underdog sort of format. So just people coming over from football already have this foundation of how I'm thinking about a portfolio of lineups, how I'm thinking about stacking, how I'm thinking about ADP values. So just overall, not just like you don't even need to be smart at baseball to come in and draft well, I think, in baseball. So just overall, the field is getting better. I think the biggest edge is actually right now understanding what the field is doing and trying to work against it. So like all these core principles, the foundation of projections, the foundation that, we've sort of ruined for ourselves by putting out the data and the stacking concepts and how you're distributing your picks throughout the draft. But then the next level, I think for me is like, how do I react to the field getting better? And how can maybe I change what I'm doing to take advantage of what they're doing? And I'm not here to say I'm like perfect or I'm like way better than anybody, but that's where I'm thinking now more is just like, how do I react to the field getting better?
For sure. What about you, Chris? What's kind of your thoughts on how the evolution of this has gone for Underdog Baseball?
It has started to sharpen up real quick, but we're still so early in the I would call the discovery and the learning phase of how to play the game and how to win the game. Because in the end, it is a game you're trying to win. And kind of like Matt said, what we have is there's a very narrow band of us, hardcore, underdog first, underdog baseball people first, and there's kind of two other groups I think that are starting to play more, and it's very fun to bring these other perspectives in. One of them are the underdog players that play underdog games in many other sports. They do football, they do the playoff contests, they do many things on the site, and they're taking those underdog game skills and moving them to baseball. The other group that I think that I'm definitely hearing a lot more from this year, and it's very fun to have these perspectives as well, are people that have played NFBC for a long time, people that played just 5x5 roto or even points leagues on NFBC or on other sites that have played fantasy baseball and now want to get in on $10 tournament with 100 and something to first. Like, it sounds fun. And they're bringing in kind of the how to win a baseball league perspective. So we have these two like groups, I think, that are migrating towards this one contest, and it's really fun to see how like both sides are approaching it.
For sure. I absolutely love it. And I can't wait to see where it keeps going and working with, listening to you guys and hopefully talking with you more about this. Let's do a couple listener questions. I'll get you all out of here. In the chat here, Brad WGM says, do you feel closing line ADP value is more important in the eliminator format since we re-pod every 2 weeks? Either of you guys can take that one.
So I think for this one, closing line ADP is going to be determined by like how much your pick moves between when you take it and the end of the contest. I think we all kind of talked about earlier how we want to be drafting this later and waiting for as much info as possible. So you actually might not get much closing line value ADP because you're waiting for that information, and I'm comfortable making that trade for some certainty.
True. Aaron Fantasy T-Ball on Twitter says, can a case be made for drafting the solo shot contest early and draft season question submitted by Kyle Bradish? That was tongue in cheek, kind of goes into what we talked about earlier about let's maybe wait on these ones a little longer and kind of get some clarity on that. Ryan Bloomfield, people might know that goes with me on Bubba the Bloom. He says, and he loves Underdog too, as I said, we talk about it a lot off air and even on air once in a while. He says, biggest strategy differences in the solo shot versus the other multi-entry contest. We hit on that, so I think we're good there. Very, very good stuff. And then Brad W. on Twitter says, my question for the show, how are you attacking the eliminator contest differently from the dinger? Well, we kind of hit on that as well. It's always nice to listener questions basically come already through the podcast. So pretty cool stuff there. I know I'm rushing to the end here, but you guys have stuff you have to do. And I think I'm going to join you here very shortly as well. But why don't we, first off, thank you. I could talk to you guys for a long time on this stuff. This is only the second time we've all talked, and it feels like we could do this for a lot longer. But before we head out, Matt, remind everybody where they can find you and what you got going on.
Yeah, so as you alluded, we're doing this on Friday night. We'll be rolling right into a draft. I think you guys are going to be joining me, and that is at the Sheep Seats, no spaces on YouTube. Do some football and some other stuff there, but usually most Friday nights you'll find me there because I'm a cool guy, and that's what I do with my Friday nights. But yeah, so we do drafts there, and then I'm just on Twitter and all over. If you're in a fantasy baseball Discord, I might be lurking there too.
What about you, Chris? Let everybody know.
So yeah, baseball on Twitter with 3 instead of an E is the easiest way to poke around and find some graphs, find some of my ramblings about baseball and football and golf as we get into the summer. That's going to be where I park a lot of those things. And random reality TV thoughts. I found that I kind of put those out there on the X as well for people, and people talk about it. So yeah, if you have any interest in any of those things, feel free. But otherwise, yeah, I think we kept it very professional for Benched with Bubba, and then we're going sheep wild tonight on the sheep seats. So
I appreciate it, but in the future you don't have to keep it professional. Trust me. It's just it's Benched with Bubba for a reason. Like, it's just it's all about hanging out like in the dugout talking about whatever. So it's all fun and games, but I'll get us out of here on that. Thanks for joining me, gentlemen. Truly appreciate it. Everybody go to Underdog Fantasy, go play some games over there. Check these guys out at Stacking Dingers podcast and on their Substack. Great stuff over there. And for now, this is Benched with Bubba, episode 655. Catch you all next time.